Well, hello and welcome to another Faith, Philosophy and Life with me, Mr. Shelton. We're in a series looking at good and evil, which is the topic we're looking at the moment. Last lesson we thought about the inconsistent triad and where we thought evil and suffering came from. And we looked at these words behind me, omnipotent, omniscient and omnibenevolent. Can you remember what they mean? Go and grab your pen and paper, because here's our cheesy intro music. So, we're going to think about where Christians think suffering comes from. Okay, so we're expanding it slightly from where we were last time. We're going to explore again what Christians think about suffering. So we said it'd be good if we could talk about why suffering's a problem for Christians. And we talked about evil last time. And yes, there is going to be some overlap between this lesson and the last one. Great if you can talk about two Christian responses to suffering. And even better if you can apply those to some real life situations. So we're going to look at what God's like. We've got a media clip we'll see, a knowledge trawl, and then some exam questions as well for us to reflect on. So, to start off with, this is a required text by the exam board, by the Educast exam board, but I suggest that all of them probably are asking you to be familiar with it. It's from Isaiah chapter 53. It's from the Old Testament, and it's called the Suffering Servant passage. It's a prophecy. It's a telling about the future, about how someone will deal with the issue of suffering. And it says this: He was pierced for our transgressions and punished for our iniquities. Pierced for our transgressions, that's our wrongdoings. Punished for our iniquities, the things that we don't measure up for. And Christians would say this is reflecting on a prophecy about Jesus. So it's worth making a note of Isaiah chapter 53, the suffering servant passage, because it's a source of authority that you can apply. Another source of authority you can apply is the story of Job. It's spelled J-O-B, it looks like Job, but it is actually pronounced Job. Trust me on that. You can, because my name's Mr. Shelton. I'm going to play a clip now that goes through the story of Job, which you would read in the Old Testament. It's one of the oldest books, actually, within the Old Testament. You'll have to forgive the narration of this. I had to edit this from where I found it. But I'd like you to watch this now, and afterwards maybe just summarise what happened in the story of Job and what's the message. So that's what you're listening for. What happened and what's the message? So let's watch this, then you're going to come back to me.
Back in Bible times, after Adam and Eve, but before Jesus, there was this guy Job, God's favourite little guy in the whole world. You see, this guy had never done anything wrong, ever. He was the richest, most powerful guy in the Eastern Hemisphere. He couldn't get enough of God, and God couldn't get enough of him. Anyway, Satan, you know Satan, glorious angel Lucifer, tried to overthrow God, cast down to hell. Well, him and God were hanging out in heaven one day, seemingly forgetting about that previously mentioned overthrowing, casting into hell thing where a certain conversation transpired. The Lord said to Satan, "Whence have you come?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and from the earth and walking up and down it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on earth, a blameless, upright guy who fears God and turns away from evil." Well, Satan didn't say anything about looking for people to torment or lives to mess up. Satan is sure that Job only worships God because he has everything so easy, and God, in his omnipotence, is certain that Job wouldn't curse him even if the devil took it away. He's certain because, well, he knows everything. God makes a bet with the devil and lets him mess Job's stuff, with the proviso he doesn't lay a finger on him, because that would be taking things too far. Not only does Satan send a band of nomads to steal the 15,000 sheep that Job owns, he also takes Job's 10 kids and kills every one of them. But he doesn't touch Job as per God's request. However, Job is surprisingly okay with this. Instead of shaking an angry fist at heaven, he changes his clothes and says, "What God wants is, praise be to God." So, Satan explains, "Sure he didn't curse you, didn't let him ruin his body, just let me kill his family and everything he owns. Come on, let me give him a disease or something." God said, cool, just don't kill him. So Satan gives him boils up and down his body. We're talking great biblical plague boils here, not your 21st century yuppie boils. And over the next 30 pages or so, his friends come by to see how badly messed up he is, and actually start to cry because he's so unrecognisable. They don't even talk to him for a week, which is okay because Job probably just sits there on a pile of ash picking his boils with a piece of broken pottery. God appears to Job in a great lightning storm, spouting things like, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And who shattered the sea with storms when it broke from the womb? Yep, that's right. God is making fun of Job for not creating the universe. For context, Job has spent his entire life worshipping this guy, and now he just went through a horrible ordeal. He has a dead family, he's bankrupt, he's in pain and dealing with rubbish friends, and here God is appearing in front of him in all his glory. God pretty much gives Job strife for the next 3 or 4 chapters about not being omnipotent, and also having the nerve to ask his Lord why these things were happening to him. So anyway, Job feels rubbish because God made fun of him, and so he says, sorry my Lord. Then just to prove God isn't totally unfair, he gives him back all the stuff he ruined, but not the dead kids. They got to stay dead. So the lesson, next time you're ill, smile and thank God for it. Otherwise, he'll get all high and mighty on you.
Okay, so what happened and what's the key message? What is it that the takeaway part of that? Okay, so with that done, we're going to move on to this. What do Christians believe about suffering? Okay, so we're going to drill in again. Some of this is an overlap from last time, some of this is in a bit more depth. What I'd like you to do is to divide your page into 6, or get a piece of paper and fold that into 6, because we're going to look at 6 different things that Christians give that explain where suffering comes from. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these behind me, and you need to pause it and summarise it into your own words, maybe draw a little picture, and then repause me or unpause me, and then you'll get the next bit of information. So here's our first one. Make sure you pause me and complete your little section and then come back to me. There's your next one. Okay, and that pretty much goes through the story of Job that we talked about. Here's our next one. Our next one. Penultimate one. And finally. Okay, so there are all different responses that Christians may give as to why there's suffering in the world and how they try and work around that. Slightly different than evil, but very similar in a lot of ways. I've got another clip I'm going to show you now. This is taken from a Channel 4 thing called Evil by Bishop Tom Wright. He's a Church of England bishop, but his points still carry across if you're doing a Catholic paper. So I'd like you to watch this, and then we'll continue after that. So let's watch this and make any notes that you need to while it's on.
Our world is in a tragic and bloody mess, and it isn't just bad luck. There's a force which drives people, you, me, politicians, and even whole nations in the wrong direction. Our world has tried to ignore it, but recent events have shown us we can't. We must take it seriously, and we must give it its true name. Evil. We can't look honestly at the world without recognizing that evil exists. Real, serious evil is going on all the time. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is a solution, and it offers us a startling but effective way of dealing with evil in the real world. Unbelievable? Well, you may be surprised.
So what exactly is evil? And what do people like me mean when we talk about Jesus' death as some kind of victory over evil? It's my belief that in today's world we've been going about things in entirely the wrong way. We tried to pretend that evil didn't exist, or that if it did, it was just a little problem and we could deal with it quite easily. People often assume that the Bible's answer to the problem of evil is Adam and Eve eating an apple in a garden. But that's a way of stating the problem, not of answering it. Again, people often suppose that the Bible blames it all on the devil or the Satan. And it's true that the force of evil is often spoken of in very personal terms. But once again, that's a way not of answering the problem, just of restating it.
When the Bible talks about demons and devils, it's not trying to explain evil, but trying to characterize the dark forces that can take control of all of us. The dark side which emerges when individuals use their free will to make bad choices in their lives. The side we see in the tragic story the Bible tells from the Garden of Eden onwards.
So the Bible doesn't offer us a theory about evil, it tells the story of how evil works and the story of what God is doing about it. And the reason a story is the best way of getting at the problem of evil is because the force of evil works as a process.
According to popular opinion at least, child molesters are the most evil people to be found today, and their crimes show all the signs of the process of evil at work. Yet they, like all of us, possess the gift of free will. They make choices too. Since the fall of Jerusalem, Israelites in exile had hoped for a Messiah who would disentangle and roll back the web of evil. But one exiled prophet transformed the image of the Messiah. The text is found here in the oldest known copy of a whole biblical book, the book of Isaiah. We sometimes refer to this passage as the suffering servant.
And this is it. This is the point of the scroll, where Isaiah launches a whole new chapter in the biblical story of God and evil. You see, Israel had been exiled for gross misconduct, much like Adam and Eve from the garden, and actually that's probably part of the point. But God is faithful, and he will do what he's promised. He will redeem Israel, humanity, and creation itself. And he will do so because of the work of the servant, whose suffering and death are the means by which all the evil in the world will be dealt with. And that's how God is going to make a new future out the other side of evil, a new future for creation itself.
He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Isaiah's servant is one of the last great signposts that leads us to the climax of the biblical story, the final stage in God's dealing with evil. And this gives us a glimpse of what we can do to make that real today. Every year at Easter, Christians celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. The whole point of Christianity is the claim that through these actual events, the evil in our world is defeated. Through these amazing events themselves, yes, but also through the way they can work out in our own time.
But why do we believe all this? To understand that, we have to go back to the sources, to the Gospels themselves. Today, people often think of the story of Jesus and his death and resurrection as just a string of random events with some Christian meaning stuck on the outside like a label. But the way the Gospel writers tell the story, the meaning of the final events is contained within the whole narrative itself. And that entire story is in turn rooted in and sums up the story of the people of Israel. That is, the story of a people with whom God made a deal that he was going to put the world to rights.
As Jesus grew up, there was social and political turmoil. The Jews were living under Roman occupation. Many people were longing for God to rescue them by sending the true king, the Messiah. But what would such a rescue operation look like? A military revolt? A sudden display of irresistible supernatural power? A leader establishing his own power and prestige? Those were the questions Jesus faced when he, like ancient Israel, went off into the desert and faced the powers of evil. After 40 days in desert seclusion, the pressure was intense, and the temptations Jesus experienced in the desert were temptations to be the Messiah people expected, to grab economic, religious, and lastly political power.
The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan."
With the crucifixion, we come close to the heart of the question of how God deals with evil. Christians claim that Jesus took on the whole burden of evil and exhausted it on the cross. But the story also shows how we can put that into practice.
When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son."
Jesus had acted out the calling which he himself had announced and which had been foretold by Isaiah. He had been the suffering servant. He had turned the other cheek. He had picked up the Roman cross and gone the second mile. And most important, he forgave his tormentors.
Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
For Christians, it's the crucifixion of Jesus, not his subsequent resurrection, which defeated evil.
You see, the resurrection wasn't the real victory. It was the sign that the victory had already been accomplished on the cross. Once Jesus had taken the full force of evil onto himself and had exhausted it, death itself had no more power over him. And that's why the new world that God had planned and promised really did come into being at Easter. And that leaves us with a task to put into practice what he had accomplished. And whether or not we can get our heads around all that theory, the gospel stories give us plenty of concrete pointers as to how to deal with evil in the here and now.
Remember how the Bible tells its story of evil. Evil is real and powerful. It's a process, a force with enough energy to overwhelm us all. You, me, our communities, and even whole nations. Evil isn't just in other places or people. It's in all of us. And in the Gospels, God deals with it by becoming a man, becoming Jesus, letting it do its worst to him and breaking its power. The result is one of the most powerful things in the whole world: forgiveness. It's tough and it's messy to go this route, but it can be done, and then the thick tide of evil begins to roll back. The lessons of the crucifixion, of how liberating honesty and forgiveness can be, are valid everywhere. But it seems we prefer not to learn them.
So Jesus' death poses an urgent question to all of us. Evil is real and it matters. Will we let that death transform not just our lives, but our whole way of life?
Okay, so we said it would be good if you could say why suffering's a problem. Great if you can give at least 2 Christian responses to it, and you've done 6 hopefully in your little grid, and even better if you can apply that to real life situations, and that's what the story of Job was for. So it's a C question we're going to do today. It's 8 marks, therefore it's 2 paragraphs with point, evidence, explanation and change in each. So you need those evidence in there as we spoke about last time. And the question is this: explain how Catholics justify belief in God against the problem of evil and suffering. So what I'd like you to do is to have a go at that. Time yourself 8 minutes, photograph everything, please send it through to your teachers. I'm going to leave it there today. Thanks very much for your time. Take care of yourself, stay safe, wash your hands, God bless you. I'll see you soon.